is going on, everyone? Welcome, one and all. This is the Hammerfist MMA Podcast, and I am your host, Tyler. Thank you for joining me this evening. It is January the 20th. It's about 9:30, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, and this is the very first episode of the podcast. So thanks again, everyone, for joining in. We've got a lot to go over here this evening. Of course, we've got here in 2019, particularly talking about UFC. We've got the ESPN partnership, broadcast of all the UFC events on ESPN and ESPN Plus. So that's going to be a big thing for us this year going forward, in particular with the UFC. So what I want to start with real quick, just give you some ideas. What's the podcast about? What kind of things are we talking about here? Obviously, the focus is MMA as a whole. Primarily, it's going to be a lot of UFC, obviously the biggest promotion out there, along with my personal favorite, and what I'm most often taking in when I'm watching MMA events. So as you may or may not know as well, kind of what goes right along with this podcast is a blog. That's kind of how I got started in things about 6 months ago or so. Just started with a free WordPress account and everything, got the blog going, came up with a little name, Hammerfist MMA, and since that time I've kind of just been taking in the events, generally every weekend, writing through it, adding some of my own thoughts as a fan, things like that. That's kind of the idea behind everything here. Of course, I'm not an analyst. We're not a media outlet or anything like that. The idea is pretty much this is for the fans, from a fan of MMA, watching the events, taking it in, giving my thoughts, and just seeing what everybody else thinks about it. So, that being said, let's get right into it. Obviously, the big focus of today as far as MMA and events going on is just yesterday evening. We've gotten our first ESPN UFC card for the year of 2019 and first ESPN card as a whole. So we're going to go through that a little bit, just kind of run through each of the fights, talk about things a little bit. It all kicked off about 6 o'clock Eastern last night, and I think the final main event ended around 12:30. So obviously a big full evening of excellent fights, very exciting. We had Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw facing off in the main event. That was great, a super fight, if you will. Much more common these days with the champ on champ, double champ chasing folks out there. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to get to is there's been a lot of questions about the ESPN and UFC. How does it work? What do you need? How do you watch it? Essentially, the idea is now, of course, you've got your early prelims, your prelim card, and then your main card. So with ESPN, the idea is those are going to be split just based on what event it is, either on ESPN, which is just normal ESPN on cable, as well ESPN Plus, which is the it's been around obviously for some time, but it's becoming a lot more popular now with the UFC. That's a subscription-based service, $5 a month, essentially gives you all access to ESPN Plus. Is it worth it? I would say if you're a fan of the UFC and you like to watch, pretty much yes. $5 a month isn't a lot, and it's going to give you access to a ton of the UFC content, at least for this year, and I'm sure it will be for years to go forward as well. That brings us back to another kind of piece of the pie where the early prelims used to be, UFC Fight Pass. I think that came down to something like $10 a month, or it was like $50 for 6 months, something like that. In my humble opinion, not really worth it anymore, guys. Honestly, I've had Fight Pass before. It was a ton of fun at first because I got to go back and watch replays of all the events I hadn't seen. I've really kind of only been in the MMA kingdom for a couple years, and there's plenty of great stuff to watch outside of that. But honestly, at this point, and especially now with ESPN Plus, really not worth it a whole lot anymore. I would say I've canceled my subscription, and I'm now on to ESPN Plus. So I'd say just weigh the options, check it out. Really, Fight Pass is good for like watching old events. There's old shows on there too, Ultimate Fighter, but I'm not going to lie to you, the quality is not great, especially if you're trying to watch on like a Fire Stick or, something like that. It's just really not great. Wouldn't recommend it anymore. I would definitely recommend ESPN Plus. Now, all that being said, I did just a little bit of research as far as now we're with ESPN. How are the stats looking? Was this a good move by the UFC? And from the little bits and pieces I can find after only one event, the answer is an absolute 100% yes. So let me just pop these notes back here real quickly. So essentially ESPN Plus, as an already existing service, they did break it down to Friday and Saturday of just this past weekend. How many new subscribers did they have? Obviously they're going to attribute most, if not basically all of that, to the UFC event. 568,000 new subscribers for Friday and Saturday alone, that's just amazing. That's a ton. You're talking about 500,000 people interested in watching at least the first UFC event. I'm sure part of that went with you get a 7-day free trial when you sign up for ESPN Plus. So that's going to play in. Obviously, they're not going to have 500,000 new subscribers every week. But opening weekend of it, if you will, that's still a huge figure. Another note here, and the way this was presented was in some kind of metered market rating. I'm not really too familiar with that myself, so I'm not going to go too deep on that. But I will mention essentially what it looked at was the number of folks that were watching ESPN on cable while the prelims were going on, and it offered some form of value, but basically the idea was it was massive. The UFC has not had such high viewership on a preliminary card since something like 2013, obviously when they were on, in the middle of the Fox deal. So that's a really big deal. Just looking at it, looks like there were a ton of eyes on this event, and as far as the UFC is concerned, only being one event, but obviously ESPN, as they say, worldwide leader in sports, and it's a great way to be partnered if you're the UFC. That's for damn sure. So, big idea, ton of people watching it. Let's hope it continues to grow and grow. Obviously, as more people are watching, they're only going to make it better and better. So, past all that stuff, let's get to some of the actual fights, guys. Let's talk about this. So, on the whole, excellent event. I very much enjoyed it. It's very, very time-consuming, obviously, taking up basically the whole night. So, I did have to take some breaks here and there to get food and whatnot. Obviously, I couldn't really just sit and watch the whole thing. Not going to lie, a lot of times I do. Pretty much takes up a whole Saturday. But it's a good way to use it if you're a pretty big fan like myself. So, obviously the big thing people are going to want to talk about is, main event, a little bit of controversy surrounding it, a little bit of controversy around the co-main event, but a lot of exciting stuff, a lot of good stuff on the lower cards too, guys. If you didn't catch it all, maybe if you only caught the main card, hey, there was some great stuff on there. So I'm just going to recap it for you now. Let's start with the early prelims. So, very first fight of the night, very first UFC fight on ESPN. This portion was actually on ESPN Plus. It was 3 fights to kick out the early prelims, which, if you recall, historically has always pretty much been on UFC Fight Pass. First fight of the night, Kyle Stewart coming in on his UFC debut against Chance Rencounter at welterweight. Also a new face in the UFC, Chance Rencounter. A bit of a goofy nickname, something Black Eagle or something. Must be Native American or whatever. Anyway, it came out strong. Chance Rencounter, he was in his UFC debut in his previous fight. This is his second UFC fight. Had a tough time. Last bout with a guy who actually fought just after him, a guy named Bilal Muhammad. Really got beat up on and lost via decision, but this time he came out first round, couple minutes in, takes Kyle Stewart down, sinks in the rear naked choke, and that's history. The fight's over within 2.5 minutes. Coming off a big win. Got to feel good for the guy getting his first UFC win. If debut doesn't go his way, lose your debut, you're feeling a lot of stress. You got to come in and put on a show. So this guy did. Got the first win on ESPN, got the first finish on ESPN, and he did it in a pretty good fashion, guys. It was a good show. Good show. Sunk in that choke. Boom. Guy tapped within seconds. So, hats off to him. Sorry for Kyle Stewart. He lost the debut, but hey, you'll come back. Get him next time. Next fight on the early prelims, we had, as the guy mentioned, Bilal Muhammad coming in. He's been in the UFC for a few years now. Doing all right. Obviously, more wins than losses for sure. He hasn't been cut or anything like that. Decent fighter. Also at welterweight, faced off against a guy. Now this guy, Jeff Neal, at welterweight, this guy is coming in hot. This guy is stacking up the wins. He's on something like a 5-fight win streak. 3 or 4 of those now are in the UFC. Overall, I'd say he pretty well smashed this guy. Jeff Neal, he put the heat on Muhammad. Unanimous decision win across the board. Pretty well-rounded guy. Pretty strong guy at welterweight. He's got a good size to him. Pretty good show. I'll say, obviously, I'm all about the big knockouts, the chokes, putting guys to sleep. But, hey, when you win in a dominant fashion in a decision that goes all 3 rounds or all 5, it's a good thing. It shows to your skills if you can keep beating up a guy for 15 or 25 minutes. So, keep an eye on this guy, Jeff Neal at welterweight. Obviously he's not ranked or anything yet, but he's creeping there. He's coming in hot. As far as guys that are, outside the top 15, once you start racking up, 3 to 5 win streak, you're looking pretty good, especially in welterweight. It's one of the stacked divisions for sure. Now, next up, we're rounding off the early prelims. We have a veteran in the game, Dennis Bermudez. Well-known guy, been at it for several years, inside the UFC for several years, against a newcomer coming into his second UFC fight, Tay Edwards. Now, as I mentioned, Dennis Bermudez, everyone knows him fairly well if you've been with the UFC for a while. But this guy, Tay Edwards, this was his second UFC fight. He came into the UFC off Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. I saw that when it happened. This guy was a beast on there. As soon as he won, he said, "Show me the contract," making the symbol for it. Dana White was on his feet. It was a quick knockout, and boom, end of the episode. Guy gets a contract. He was seeming fairly hyped coming in. Fights out of Virginia Beach. Pretty decent sized guy. This is at lightweight. Young guy, muscular guy. Pretty typical look as far as it goes when you're thinking about a MMA fighter. Strong, decent looking skill. So he came in. He had his last fight against Don Madge, another UFC debut. If you guys have not seen that fight, Don Madge and Tay Edwards, strongly recommend you watch that fight. That was another one that got buried in the prelims, but man, I am telling you, as far as prelim fights go, that was amazing. I don't remember when it was. It was a couple months ago now, but absolutely check it out. This guy, Don Madge, is amazing. Long story short, Tay Edwards, he got knocked out in his UFC debut. Here he comes in his second fight, ends up getting beaten up by the veteran Dennis Bermudez for all 3 rounds, loses the fight. To his credit, he did come in on short notice, so got to give him that a little bit. But hey, hope he'll stick around for a while. I'm sure the guy's got promise. He definitely showed it off on the Contender Series. Now he just needs to make it happen in the big show, in the real UFC. But another point too, Dennis Bermudez. So like I said, veteran in the game. Unfortunately, here he was on what ended up being his last fight. Fight ends, and he essentially announces his retirement, leaves his gloves in the octagon, and bids farewell. Thanks everyone for their support. And being fans and everything else. So wishing him the best of luck. Unfortunately, coming in, he had been on like a 4-fight losing streak. So at the very least, glad he was able to come out with the win for his retirement fight. So let's move it right along here. We've got a few more, and then we'll get to some of the big ones, guys. We're moving on to the prelims. Now, these were on ESPN. Like I said, massive viewership. Biggest viewership for the UFC since something like 2013. So ESPN's, as of one event, has been a heck of a show for them. Now, this one was on normal cable ESPN. We're no longer in ESPN Plus for this set of fights on the prelims. Kicking it off at bantamweight, Corey Sandhagen. A few fights into the UFC, guys coming in hot, I'm telling you. Now coming up against Mario Bautista. So this guy, he was pretty fairly hyped coming in. He was undefeated, 6-0, coming from some smaller promotions. So this was his number one, his UFC debut. Number two, unfortunately, it was also on short notice. So a bit of a tough spot for him. But think about it. A lot of the guys that come into the UFC, that's kind of their ticket in. Be ready at all times. If you're not in the big show, stay ready, stay in shape, keep training. Pardon me. And be ready to go at a moment's notice. So the shot came for Bautista. He came in. Unfortunately for him, he got matched up with Corey Sandhagen, and it did not go his way. This fight, pardon me, goodness. This fight kicked right off. These guys were going at it, coming in strong. Sandhagen, like I said, he's been in the UFC for a couple fights, but he's sticking strong. He's piling up the win streak of 2 or 3 at this point. Ends up getting the submission via an armbar. This was a pretty good one, guys. If you're going to go back and haven't seen the prelims, or there's only a couple fights you want to check out, I definitely recommend this fight, and I definitely recommend checking out this guy, Corey Sandhagen, at 135. Excellent fight, and an excellent fighter for sure. This fight lasted all of 3.5 minutes, and it was basically, once they got tangled up, Sandhagen was at it with submission attempt after submission attempt. I think in the whole few minutes of the fight, he had 3 or 4 different submissions that he attempted, arm bars, triangle, I think a Kimura at one point. Excellent quick fight, guys. Definitely recommend you check it out, and definitely keep an eye on this guy, Corey Sandhagen. He is looking good in his first few UFC fights. Next here we had a matchup of 2 guys in light heavyweight, 205. Coming off both of these guys from Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Lonzo Minifield, a lot of people know, played some football, all that good stuff, and then went into MMA. Has remained undefeated up until that point, 7-0, against another guy, Vinicius Moreira. Also fairly hyped guy coming in, put on a heck of a show on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Pretty big guys at light heavyweight. So these 2 guys came in. They were essentially just banging back and forth. It was, I love those kind of fights, if I'm being honest. Who's going to last the longest? Whose chin is going to hold up? Who is going to throw the harder punches? That is exactly what this fight was, guys. And Alonzo Minifield, he put in the work. I think it was 4 minutes into the round. First round, knocks him down, finishes him, gets the TKO, and the fight is over. So Alonzo Minifield gets the win there. Vinicius Moreira taking the L, but he'll most certainly be back. Both these guys put on a great show, and Minifield walked away with the win. Now we're moving right up here. We're getting closer to the main card. Had a couple more on the prelims. Next, we had women's flyweight. Joanne Calderwood, also known as JoJo, used to fight in strawweight. Obviously, before flyweight was a division open to women's divisions in the UFC. She came in. She was looking real good, and she was up against somewhat of a hype train in her UFC debut, Ariane Lipsky. She is coming from some other promotions. I think just prior to this, she was flyweight women's champ in KSW, which is a Polish MMA promotion. So she was looking pretty hyped coming into the fight. Unfortunately, end of the day, it just wasn't there for her in her debut. They got her pretty good in the debut, sticking her up against JoJo Calderwood. This woman is a beast at flyweight. I'm telling you, you got to check this out. Check this girl out if you're into some of the smaller weight divisions, women's divisions. This is definitely a lady you guys got to check out. She's got some good fights in the UFC, and especially this one, she put on a great show. With this, she should definitely be knocking herself up the flyweight, women's flyweight rankings for sure. I'm not sure if she was ranked or not, but if she wasn't, she definitely should be after this fight. She definitely put on a show. Fight went to a decision, but it was all 3 rounds was JoJo all the way. I think at least 2 of the judges scored at 30-26. So she was putting the work in, and she definitely got it done. Great fight. Now, we're getting into the big ones here, guys. Next one up, this one for me is the fight of the night for sure. You know, I'm a little biased. It was my man, my favorite fighter all around since I started watching MMA, Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Love this guy. Just cannot say enough good things about him, guys. If you know anything about MMA or you're a fan of UFC whatsoever, you're going to be hard-pressed not to know who this guy is. Just goes wild in there, loves to fight, loves to put on a show. I cannot say enough good things about this guy when it comes to being a fan of MMA and the UFC, guys. He's facing off against Alexander Hernandez. So, if you may recall, Hernandez, he came in on short notice, got his UFC debut in 2018. Being a short notice fight, he ended up facing the number 8 ranked lightweight at the time, Beneil Dariush. 30 seconds into that fight, 30 seconds a minute, whatever it was round 1 and it was damn early. Throws a straight right, knocks Dariush out cold, puts him on his back. Excellent debut for that dude. So by the time he's in his second UFC fight, he's already in the top 10 basically. He came in, had a second fight with Olivier Aubin-Mercier, puts this guy down via decision. Everyone wanted to know, hey, is it a fluke? Anything can happen in MMA. Pretty much anybody can get that flash knockout. Could have been just for this guy. It was his first UFC fight. Turns out, no, it wasn't a fluke. This guy put in work in his decision win over Aubin-Mercier. So he was 2-0 in the UFC coming into this fight. But then they hit him with the hammer. They put him up against Donald Cerrone. Another thing about Cerrone, he's coming off something like 8 fights at welterweight. Used to fight at lightweight a year or 2 back. Put in a lot of work in that division. Obviously, everybody who knows him pretty much loves him. Guy's a winning machine, fighting machine. Always putting in work, always. And a lot of time coming out on top, guys. So Cerrone was fighting at welterweight for a while. Did pretty good. Unfortunately, the past year or so was not quite his time at welterweight. He started dying down. Went on a bit of a losing streak, but finally came back, had his fight with Mike Perry back in November, I think it was, on the 25th anniversary card in Denver, Colorado. Fought Mike Perry, near broke his arm, submitted him, became the all-time win leader and finish leader in the UFC, WEC, Zuffa era, if you will. So amazing accomplishments for Cerrone. End of the day, here we go. Let's come back to current time. He's coming into this fight. So, fight kicks off. Leading up to the fight, we had a good bit of trash talk out of Hernandez. If you know much about Cerrone, he's not much of a trash talker these days. He's kind of figured out, hey, if I'm into all that, I'm fighting angry. And fighting angry is no longer my thing. He's a little older now, 36 or so. So he just plays it cool, says, hey, I can't wait for the fight. Hernandez, he's coming in hot. He's a young gun. He's trying to climb these rankings and just smash whoever he can. He's confident because he's had 2 fights in the UFC, both gone his way pretty confidently. So, come into this fight, and knowing Cowboy, anybody who knows Cowboy, he's coming back to lightweight. He says he's chasing that title. And last night, he proved it, guys, big time. He put in the work. He pieced Hernandez up for this fight. Went almost the full 2 rounds. Ended up as a TKO, but, the first 30 seconds, Cerrone's always slow at the start. Hernandez came in pushing hard. The guy does have a gas tank for sure. I'll definitely give him that. He definitely kept up the pace the whole time, even though he was getting beat up pretty good. But Cowboy kept putting it in, piecing him up. His striking was totally on point. He put on a straight-up Muay Thai clinic on Hernandez. You could kind of see it throughout the fight. If you watch Cerrone fight a lot, you can see he kind of sets up the punches, uses that a lot of time to set up a high head kick. Every time he lands that head kick, it's always super, super strong. It's exactly what he did here. He spent the first round just piecing him up. Second round, he was really setting that kick up, started to throw a few. And finally, a couple minutes into the second round, sets up with the left, feints it off really good. Just watching it in slow motion, this is the art portion of mixed martial arts, I'm telling you. Throws in the feint with the left. You see Hernandez duck to his left to avoid Cerrone's left, which, being a feint, is not there. Instead, he switches it up, throws that right leg hard as he can. Boom. Straight to the dome of Hernandez. He starts wobbling him, goes to the ground, and Cerrone finishes him with ground and pound. So he extends that finish record, extends his all-time win record in UFC, WEC. Beautiful fight, guys. Definitely got to check this out. If for whatever reason you missed it, you got to check it out. Like I said, always love Cowboy Cerrone. Always puts on a show. Now, let's get right on to the main card, guys. So here we go. We got another set of fights here. Couple more great ones, guys. So here we are. We're back on ESPN Plus for the main card, and we're moving toward that main event. Cejudo versus Dillashaw, champ versus champ. Kick this one off. Glover Teixeira, hardened veteran at this point at light heavyweight, and facing off with Carl Roberson. So Carl Roberson, I think he came in the UFC off of Dana White's Looking for a Fight. Definitely recommend that little show if you haven't seen it. It's on YouTube. Excellent little mini series, if you will. Carl Roberson, he's actually coming in on number one on short notice. Number two, his normal fighting weight is middleweight, so usually he's at 185. This one was at 205. End of the day, did not go his way. Now, start of the fight, Roberson was looking really, really good. He actually almost finished. He almost finished Glover. Put in some extremely hard elbows. Glover had him in trying to wrestle him, going for the takedown, and Roberson just bashing him with these elbows, man, right on the side of the head, right on the ear, knocking his equilibrium off. At one point, I would have almost even said they could have stopped that fight in Roberson's favor. Teixeira was taken down for a second there. He looked like he almost went limp. So looking great for Roberson at the start, but I don't know if he just gassed or ended up getting rocked or what, but Teixeira took him down, kept going for the submissions. Obviously, Glover Teixeira, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's going to put in the work on the ground. Gets Roberson to the ground, starts working submissions on him, and eventually locks in that arm triangle choke, takes him down, and he taps within a few seconds. Glover Teixeira takes the win. Next, we've got another one. This one was pretty hyped. Paige Van Zandt and Rachel Ostovich at flyweight. Now, coming into this fight, obviously, ton of controversy and weird stuff going on. Obviously, what everyone's going to think looking at this fight, you got two very pretty girls in women's MMA, some of the prettiest out there. So, number one, obviously, that puts a lot of eyes on it. Sex appeal sells and everything, even in the UFC, guys. Paige Van Zandt, total cutie, obviously, and Rachel Ostovich as well. Had all the controversy with her when the fight was scheduled. Her husband ended up beating up on her and all this domestic violence and craziness. So everyone thought the fight was off, and then Ostovich said, no, I'm going to heal up. I'll be good. It was pretty brutal, guys, looking back at that, seeing what happened to her. All respect to her for still showing up and even making this thing happen. It was crazy. She had a lot of heart going in there. Had her family with her mom and dad and brother in her corner. Hey, like I said, all respect to her for still showing up in the midst of this craziness. So she makes it to the fight. Paige Van Zandt coming in. She as well, she's been on a long layoff, over a year. In her last fight, broke her arm. Had to get multiple surgeries to correct it and get it healed. But finally she makes it. They're both good. They both make it to the fight. As far as a women's flyweight fight goes, this one was quite a banger. Ostovich coming to the UFC off of the Ultimate Fighter for the women's flyweight division. She didn't look horribly great on the show, if I'm being honest, thinking back to some of the episodes I saw, but coming in here, fighting in the actual UFC against a pretty well-known flyweight fighter in Van Zant, Ostovich was looking pretty good. She landed some very hard shots. Her wrestling and jiu-jitsu skills were on point. A couple times she was landing a sick right-hand combo, hard right hand flush on Van Zant's chin, following that with a trip from behind, throwing her to the ground, getting her in, wrestling her real well. Ostovich was definitely winning this fight. If this thing was going to go all 3 rounds, she was definitely going to win that decision. But midway through, they start a pretty good grappling exchange. Ends up going into the second round. They get tied up. Grappling exchange continues, and it was a little weird how it happened. Definitely got to watch the replay. But as they're in this scramble, they're fighting back and forth for submissions. Eventually, Van Zant gets her in kind of a high armbar, actually, a little bit unique, almost coming from a position of a rear naked choke. Starts sliding off her back, off of Ostovich's back forward. Kind of lands on the ground, but plants her hips in a certain way that she's still got a tight hold on that arm. Just cranks it as Van Zant hits the floor. The momentum carries, and Ostovich is still trying to stand up. So all that momentum and weight from Van Zant laying on that arm, boom, falls right on the elbow. Totally hyperextends it, and Ostovich taps right then and there to the armbar. Paige said that she could hear a pop, so hopefully nothing too serious for Ostovich. Hopefully she'll get healed up and come back. All in all, it's a pretty great fight. Next up, also at flyweight, men's flyweight. Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about the flyweight division, going away. A lot of the chatter here was sending Dillashaw in from bantamweight to win the flyweight title from Henry Cejudo, kill off the flyweight division. We'll get to that further in just a little bit. But here we had another of some of the top contenders, guys. At flyweight, still sticking around. Joseph Benavidez, obviously he goes back kind of all the way as far as men's flyweight goes in the UFC. He was one of the original 4 with Demetrius Johnson. Always kind of giving him a run for the money. Always kind of chasing those top few spots in the flyweight rankings. Against Dustin Ortiz. Definitely an up-and-comer in the flyweight division. Been smashing through people. Putting on some surprisingly great fights for flyweight. All around, guy's a solid younger fighter. So these two guys face off. It's a back-to-back war. Really evenly matched, these two guys, as far as striking and everything goes. A lot of this fight was actually really decided by the better wrestler. Now, of course, the thing was, both these guys, excellent wrestlers. So a lot of this fight was pretty much a wrestling match. It was about who was going to stay stronger, who was going to carry through. In the end, that was Benavidez with the stronger wrestling. Think about it. You're wrestling that whole time. You're going to gas very, very quickly. These guys, however, excellent endurance. Kept it up for the whole fight, went all 3 rounds, and ultimately Benavidez went with the decision. It was a close one, though. I think it was a 29-28. Pretty sure it was unanimous, though. I don't think it was a split decision. Still recalling it was a unanimous decision for Benavidez, but man, that was a close fight. All right, moving right along. Next up was a lightweight fight. We had Gregor Gillespie. Obviously, this guy undefeated, getting pretty well known in the UFC. Had several fights, putting on a great show every time. Gregor the Gift, facing off against a guy returning to lightweight in Yancy Medeiros. Similar to Cowboy, this guy went up to welterweight, fought 4 fights at welterweight, I think, went something like 3-1. If you guys remember last year, this guy Yancy Medeiros had a bout with Charles Oliveira, the other Cowboy, secondary Cowboy, in my humble opinion. No one can beat the OG Cowboy. That was an absolute banger. That thing was fight of the year for sure. Amazing fight. This guy, Medeiros, he pretty much always puts in a show. So I'm thinking coming into this, here's a guy who can really put the work in on Gillespie, really give him something to to come up against, really give him a run for his money in an undefeated guy. But this one, unfortunately for Medeiros, this turned out to be a straight-up wrestling clinic. This guy, Gregor Gillespie, he is an absolute beast when it comes to wrestling. He was ragdolling Medeiros all over the place. Straight up, like I said, wrestling clinic. Gregor had it from the first round. Didn't go to decision. Went to the very final second of the second round. Finally, he had Medeiros face down. Couldn't get up. Was just beating on him side to side, ground and pound. Took the fight. So here we go, guys. Let's get into the co-main and the main event. So, definite amount of controversy following both of these fights, but let's run through it real quick. So in our co-main, first oddity, if you will, you had Greg Hardy in there. If you know about Greg Hardy, he's got quite the storied past. Obviously played for the Panthers, pro football player, and a great athlete at that, great football player, excellent defensive player. Don't want to go into it too deep as far as the story, but a lot of people know kind of how he got out of the NFL and out of football. Was allegedly, had some domestic violence issues, had a bad temper, all this kind of stuff. Ended up beating up on his girlfriend, allegedly. A lot of people obviously believe that to be the case. There's some photos that have been floating around, all this kind of craziness about how she looked after the whole thing. Pretty gruesome stuff. And he is a big dude, something like 6.5 feet tall. The guy actually cuts weight to meet the heavyweight limit at 265, and he is like all muscle. So this guy is an absolute beast. But like I said, got the storied past. Some love him, some hate him for that reason. It is what it is. End of the day, the guy's in the UFC, and he did prove he can fight, but this was a heck of a fight, guys. He fought off against Alan Crowder, also coming into the UFC off of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, the same as Hardy. Another big guy in the heavyweight division. This was his second or third fight in the UFC. It was Hardy's debut in the actual UFC. He got a developmental contract on the Contender Series. 2 knockouts in Contender Series for Hardy. Crowder did the same thing, but he got an immediate UFC contract. Had a great fight in his last outing, Crowder did. So ultimately they matched these two guys up for the co-main event here on the first ESPN card. Now, let me just mention this. This is just my own kind of thoughts of it, if you will. Everybody said, all right, Greg Hardy and this guy, Alan Crowder. People know Hardy, but Crowder, he's kind of an unknown. And, Greg Hardy, even though people know him from football, the guy's 3-0. He's had 3 professional MMA fights. What on earth is this guy doing in a co-main event of the first ESPN card with UFC? If you ask me, it's a money move, guys. Think about it. So, ESPN Plus. We're back on ESPN Plus now, don't forget, for this main card. Now, this is the subscription service. $5 a month. You don't get it on cable. It's not normal ESPN. It's not free with ESPN. Not any kind of thing like that. So, in my eyes, this was definitely just a money move by the UFC and the decision makers out there. They figure, hey, we'll slot this guy in. A lot of people know him who are not traditional MMA fans, or maybe don't even know he's in MMA. They'll see his name. They'll see his face. Hey, I remember that guy from NFL. He was a great player. I remember this guy from his whole trouble with domestic violence and all this craziness. I want to watch this guy. I want to tune into this thing. So you have to imagine, of those 568,000 new subscribers on Friday and Saturday alone, some little chunk of those guys had to be coming from people just saying, hey, I don't know MMA, but I know about Greg Hardy, and I want to see what this guy's all about. I want to see this guy get beat up because he's a woman beater, whatever. Anyway, that's what I think it was. Now, let's get to the deal of what actually happened in this freaking fight. Started off all right. Hardy comes in with his normal, thus far, 3-fight game plan. Running and gunning. throwing absolute bombs. Everybody else so far, he's just straight up knocked out. His longest fight was literally been 56 seconds. This one, it ends up lasting at least the whole first round. Hardy did show that he's got a little bit of a gas tank. And Crowder, on the other hand, let's give it up for this guy. He did put on the show as far as with his chin. This guy did not go out. He held up to Hardy's punches pretty well. Sorry about that. Just need to grab a little drink here. His chin definitely held up. Crowder did. Went the whole first round. They're throwing back and forth. Hardy just continues to drop bombs, trying to knock this dude out. Crowder is taunting him, jawing at him, sticking his tongue out, laughing, trying to get him pissed off and get him to fight harder and miss and fight stupid and gas out. Crowder put on a good bit of wrestling as well. He did say that was his game plan. We're going to just wrestle this guy. He's nothing but strikes. He can't wrestle, whatever. And it was apparent Hardy's definitely not a amazing wrestler by any stretch of the imagination. The best he could do was survive, which he did. We'll give him that. They got out of the first round. They weren't gassed. They kept going. So second round comes, same kind of thing going back and forth. Eventually, Hardy ends up standing, if you will. Crowder is kind of on his knees to get up, and boom. Greg Hardy nails this dude in the head with an illegal knee while Crowder's knee is on the ground. So just trying to describe that scenario to confirm for you. Yes, it was obvious, 100% obvious, illegal knee, and it was a very hard knee to the head of Crowder. Guy goes down. Ref, Big Dan Miragliotta steps in, throws him off. At that point, Greg Hardy, claims he thinks he had won the fight because it had been stopped, but to his dismay, no. Miragliotta immediately goes to the corner or to the announcers or judges or whoever and says, hey, if this guy can't continue, I'm disqualifying him. And that's ultimately what it came to be, guys. We watched the replay. It's pretty gruesome watching a dude just take a knee to the head like that while he's down. It's obvious reasons as to why those kind of moves are illegal in pretty much all of regulated MMA, which is just about everything now. It's not the old days of old in Pride with slamming and kicking heads of people on the ground, soccer kicking people's head like a ball or anything crazy like that. All regulated now, and unfortunately for Greg Hardy, you cannot smash somebody in the head with your knee when they are down like that. So he was disqualified. Unfortunately for him, that's really the last thing he needs in his career. He has his UFC debut. He's surviving. He's still got a chance to win. Lands an illegal knee like that and gets disqualified. Cost him his professional unbeaten record of 3-0. He's now 3-1 due to that. Crowder technically takes the win, but not something you want to see, especially on this card. First one on ESPN, co-main event with a guy who a lot of people said had no business being there. Just a crazy way for it to go down, guys. Unfortunate to say the least. Would have much rather seen this one play out normally. In the post-fight press conference, obviously Dana White got a lot of questions about it. He said, if anything, we learned the guy, he can fight. He's in the UFC. He will be back for another fight. Speaking on Greg Hardy, of course. Unfortunate what happened. Dana White feels it's basically just a rookie mistake. Greg Hardy was also at the post-fight press conference. Obviously got a lot of questions about it. Said, hey, basically that was a rookie mistake. I mistimed that knee. Guy was down. It's on me, or I take responsibility for it, all that kind of stuff. So just hate to see it go down that way. But all in all, Greg Hardy will be back. He was saying he felt bad and let Dana down, all this kind of stuff. If the UFC will have him back, whatever. Like I said, love him or hate him. He's got a storied past. End of the day, the guy can fight at the very least, so he's here to stay. That's going to bring us, guys, to the main event. We had the flyweight champ, Henry Cejudo, Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling, UFC champion, coming up against TJ Dillashaw, the UFC bantamweight champion, 135 pounds. Goes through a 12-week camp, gets his diet in shape, gets his body in shape, able to cut down to 125. Both of these gentlemen actually came in at weight under the 125-pound limit. Both were 124 and a half, 124.6 pounds, something like that. Crazy to think, seeing, Dillashaw, he has to cut weight to get to 135, and Cejudo, man, this guy leading up to the fight, this guy was putting pictures on Instagram and everything, looking just so completely jacked. I mean, I guess it helps him. He's like 5'3" or whatever. Only way he can get to that weight. But let's get into the actual fight, guys. Unfortunately, I have to say, for all this was hyped up to be, main event of the first ESPN UFC card, unfortunately ended up surrounded in some controversy. So here's what happened, guys. Spoilers ahead, obviously, just like all these others if you hadn't seen it. If you hadn't seen it, definitely recommend you don't listen and go watch the fights. The fight lasted all of 30 seconds, quite literally. 32 seconds into round one. They come out swinging. If you're talking to me, like I said, by a fan, for other fans, not an analyst or any kind of nonsense like that, so I am going to be a little biased at times. I was coming into this one rooting for Dillashaw. Maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I am of the camp that I'm not huge on the flyweight division. Like I said, I like the big heavy knockouts, all that crazy stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'll go in for the technique as well. And a lot of these smaller guys are kind of, as opposed to being built on power due to their size, they are built on technique. And they put on some good ones. Demetrius Johnson, obviously, hell of a flyweight fighter. Unfortunately, no longer in the UFC. But, I don't know, man. TJ just came in, and it almost immediately, the way he got hit and the way his body reacted to being hit and everything, almost immediately you think it's due to that extra weight cut going down to 125. Basically how it started, their first few seconds they're feeling each other out. I think where it started was TJ kind of set up for the big overhand right that he does. Is actually the same overhand right that he threw that kind of smashed Renan Barão when he won the bantamweight title for the first time. He kind of feints back but leans in, almost to get the opposing fighter to take a step back and then throw that big overhand right at a little further range, and then it ends up landing flush, and it's a big power shot. That's kind of what he had set up here, but Cejudo didn't bite on the feint. He didn't step back. Instead, he just basically ducked under. Overhand right missed, and from there he could have either shot a takedown on Dillashaw or kind of like he did, he basically just countered a little bit, but it was more defensive. Popped him back, clocked him one, clipped him a little bit, and then basically just shoved Dillashaw to the ground. That was a little strange. Dillashaw, after the fight, was saying, big grown man shoving you down, you're going to go to the ground. And from what I've seen, doesn't always happen that way. But, whatever. Anyway, Cejudo shoves him, he gets back up, and Cejudo literally just starts piecing him up. Throws a couple great head kicks, not really landing flush, but clipping Dillashaw pretty good. Ends up sending him back to the ground. Dillashaw does at first shoot for a single leg off the ground, kind of a thing that those with a wrestling history tend to do when they start to get desperate and they're on the ground already with the guy above them. Go in for the single leg. Cejudo throws a mean uppercut. Hits Dillashaw flush. Dillashaw starts to get up, and Cejudo pops him with a left hook and sends him back to the ground, starts ground and pounding. Ref calls a stop to the fight. Now, Dillashaw gets up. To me, he's still a little bit on wobbly legs. And again, guys, this is coming from someone who was rooting for Dillashaw. I am a TJ Dillashaw fan. I thought he was going to win this fight. Dillashaw says the fight was stopped way too early. He was never rocked. He was never on wobbly legs. He was fine. and that him being on the ground, he was simply going for a single leg. Maybe it's popular, maybe it's unpopular opinion. I got to disagree, guys. I think, Dillashaw wasn't out, but he was not defending himself, and that's what it is. If you are making defensive moves to get back to your feet, that's number one. At the very least, showing the ref that you are of sound mind and you are able to continue without taking ridiculous amounts of damage. Dillashaw was sort of getting back to his feet, but he was standing straight up. He wasn't really doing it defensively, anything like that. He was not blocking Cejudo's punches. Cejudo was just landing shot after shot. I would have to agree with the ref's point of view. You're going in, you're taking damage, you are not intelligently defending yourself for several shots. That's the fight. You don't have to be knocked out cold for that to be the end of the fight. That's the meaning of a TKO, guys. Technical knockout. And that's exactly what happened here. Technically, this guy was finished, if you will, by not defending himself. And end of the day, that's what I think it was. Now, that being stated, fight's over in 32 seconds. Cejudo retains the flyweight title. TJ Dillashaw, obviously, he is still the bantamweight champ. Ultimately, he just failed in his chase for the double champ gold to go down. Another historic thing. No double champ has ever gotten that way by going down in weight. All of the double champs we have seen have gone up in weight to challenge for the next weight class up. But Dillashaw happened to go down in weight. Unfortunately for him, he lost. Big controversy coming right out of it into the post-fight press conference. It's immediate. Dillashaw does come into the conference, but basically all his answers are, this opportunity was stolen from me. That ref didn't give me the opportunity to fight, so on and so forth. If you ask me, coming even from a Dillashaw fan, the guy was a bit of a sore loser. I do feel for him putting in 12 weeks, kind of reworking his body and his diet and everything else to get down to that weight where he can fight. So, hey, I feel bad for him. You lose after all that in 30 seconds. That does kind of suck ass for you. But, hey, at the end of the day, it is what it is. Cejudo allegedly, not allegedly, I guess, but putting the point on the fact that he is a champ for a reason, and he has defended his title. So it continues from there. Dana White said something similar when he was speaking his part at the press conference. He agreed that the fight was stopped too early. It's a super fight. You got to let the guys fight. But, hey, I got to go back to it. Dillashaw was not intelligently defending himself, and it is what it is, The fight got called, and Cejudo came away with the win. So, that is going to wrap us up, guys, for the actual fight card. What do we got coming up next? We've got another Fight Night event coming up here in just a couple weeks, February 2nd. So, not next weekend, but the weekend after. This one is going to be coming to us from Brazil, in fact. This one is going to be on ESPN and ESPN Plus. No, pardon me. Actually, this entire card is going to be on ESPN Plus. So, if you did not burn your ESPN Plus free trial this weekend, definitely recommend you do it next event, February the 2nd. It's going to be Rafael Assunção versus Marlon Moraes in bantamweight in the main event. That's going to be a good one. This is a rematch for these guys. And in the co-main, we've actually got a great fight as well. Jose Aldo returning at featherweight against a definite up-and-comer. This is the guy looking like he might fight for the title next at featherweight, Renato Moicano. He served as the backup fighter for champ Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega, if you happen to see that. Excellent fight, by the way. Moicano served as the backup. Unfortunately, did not make weight, so technically he didn't really come in as the backup. He was there, but unfortunately didn't make weight. Only got down to 146. Did not make championship weight. But that's what we're looking at for the next event, guys. It's going to be a good one coming to us from Brazil on Saturday, February 2nd. Excellent night of fights yesterday, guys. lot of controversy on the top of the card, but luckily for us, we had some good stuff sprinkled in through the early prelims and prelims alike. Like I said, my man Donald Cerrone, always putting in that work. Man, I love to watch that dude fight. Can't wait to see him again. He called out McGregor and any top 5 lightweight, basically. Let's see what happens. McGregor came back and said on Twitter, "Hey, I saw you, Cerrone. Good fight. I'll fight you." So let's see where it turns out. But all that being said, guys, hey, bulk of this was going to be basically just going over the fights for the card we just saw last night. First episode of the Hammerfist MMA Podcast. All this being said, hey, for me, this is a hobby and an interest. I'm not not a media MMA media provider, any kind of stuff like that. I'm just a guy who loves to watch MMA, loves to talk about MMA. So I thought I'd try my hand at adding a podcast to the blog I've been doing for a little while, about 6 months or so. Any kind of feedback you guys got, I'd love to hear it. Say, hey, it's great, I'll listen again, or nah, man, this sucks. I think I'm gonna try to stick with it, even if it's not the most popular thing out there. Because like I said, it's just a hobby for me, guys. It's an interest. But that being said, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Even just being doing it as a hobby, I love to make it good. I want to make it as professional as possible with the resources I've got. I want it to be something that people would enjoy listening to, and end of the day, we can come back and we can talk about it and get connected with people who also love it. So you can hit me up on Twitter at Hammerfist_MMA. My name is Tyler. You can talk to me personally. That's me behind the @ symbol on that Twitter handle. Hit me up on Twitter. Obviously, you can check out the blog too. Right now, we're still just running with the free stuff on WordPress. Hammerfistmma.wordpress.com. Don't expect that one to be sticking around too much longer. I'm working on the domain as we speak. That's going to become, hopefully, hammerfistmma.com here in the near future. I'll just still kind of be running the WordPress blog template, but check it out. Shoot me your feedback on there. You can contact me through the blog. You can contact me on Twitter. Going to be posting up the podcasts on YouTube. At this very moment, we're just in audio. I have since lent out my camera and do not have it with me currently, but kind of struck the need, got my audio stuff all worked up, and thought, hey, let's put this thing together. We had a great night of fights just recently. Now's the time to start putting this thing together and just kind of run with it, have some fun with it, see how I can improve. All that being said, guys, still got one more thing I want to throw out there. I got a good buddy, goes by the name of Gerald. He's been doing his podcast, and I've been watching it. Love to hear him talk about it. This guy's got a great passion for what he does, and in his hobby and his interests, I would definitely say this guy really kind of got me to the step of, outside of doing the little bits and stuff I do with the blog, urging me to get a little confidence, put a podcast together, kind of put this thing out there and have some fun with it. So I want to give a shout out to my man Gerald. Go and check him out. He does a podcast, Lakers Talk with Gerald, kind of centered around obviously the Los Angeles Lakers, but I'm telling you guys, go and check this guy out, LakersTalkWithGerald.com. You can check him out on YouTube, Lakers Talk with Gerald. You can check him out. His website, Lakers Talk with Gerald, will lead you directly to his list of podcasts. He's got 20-something episodes out there. Guy's only been doing it for like a month and a half. And I'll tell you this, I'm not even big on Lakers or NBA, but I still like to watch this guy's podcast. I like to see him be confident about it, and he speaks well, and just makes it an interesting thing to watch. So urge you guys to check it out. Give him a follow. Check him out. Check out his stuff. Excellent content, whether you like the Lakers or not. Other than that, guys, hey, we've been going at this for almost an hour. I had no idea how long I was going to really run this thing. Maybe it's going to give me some ideas how to keep doing it in the future. Like I said, hit me up on Twitter at Hammerfist_MMA. Check out the blog, hammerfistmma.wordpress.com. This is Tyler coming to you, Hammerfist MMA Podcast, first episode. Let me know what you think, guys, and if you made it this far, I'd like to take this minute just to thank you very much. Really appreciate anybody out there who's listening. Obviously, that's the support, is just listening, and I very, very much appreciate it. So thank you guys for checking it out, and we'll talk to you next time. Hope you have a good one. Thanks.